how many languages do you speak? I'll be interested to know how many languages, how many bilingual or multilingual people we have here. All right, already seeing some answers. Ooh, there's even some people here that can speak 5+ languages, and that's really impressive. I forgot to mention programming languages are not included. Sorry about that. Just spoken languages. That's awesome. Cool. So most people here actually speak more than one language, and that's really awesome because being bilingual gives you a different perspective on language and thinking that is associated to that. That is really cool. All right, let's jump to our next question. How much do you already know about UX writing and inclusive design? So we have I don't know much. I've read about it. I've worked in this discipline. I do this regularly, or I'm a total pro. All right. This will really help me to identify how much I can go in detail and how much I should explain about UX writing and inclusive design. So this really helps me out for the workshop as well. And most of you have heard about it before. That's great. Some people have also worked in it before. And we also have some pros. But I know that often people don't pick the pro option because they're insecure about it, but that's totally fine. If you're a pro, you're a pro. You should select that option. Cool. Awesome. I think then we have a great base. The third question and the last one for now is, what do you want to learn about in today's workshop? So what is the most interesting to you? I think you can select multiple options in this question. So we have inclusive design, biased language, UX writing, the common mistakes in the design process, all of these things. Let's see. Let's see what you want to hear about the most. Cool. All right. Common mistakes in the design process, very interesting. UX writing basics, perfect. You're gonna get that for sure. Inclusive design. All right. I think people have a hard time deciding, but we will cover all of these topics. And if there's additional questions, um, we can try to answer them in the end. Cool. Cool. Great. Awesome. Well, then, thank you for your participation. It was really nice to hear something about you. And later on in the other interactive parts, I will come back to that and we will do some exercises together. So that's going to be fun. I'm going to deactivate the poll for now and go back to my presentation. So let's start with inclusive design and writing. I really like this picture that you can see here on the right because it pretty much explains what inclusivity is about. It's about creating a space that is welcome to essentially everyone, right? No matter the background, no matter the race, sexual orientation, whatever else there could be. What I'm specifically going to focus on today is biased language and what we have to pay attention to when we're designing. So when it comes to inclusive design in our services and in our processes and websites, apps, whatever it is that we are designing. Let's start with the title of my workshop, right? How the words can shape our thinking. What we want to do is we want to break the default. And for that, I'm going to try to explain to you how we can think more actively about when we have biases and when we're using biased language, for example, or biased ideas in our designs, and how we can remove ourselves from this idea that there's a we and there's a them. You know, we keep separating people into groups based on stereotypes and the experiences we've had, and that makes it really hard to empathize with certain groups of people. And that can be troublesome because as a designer, our job is to have empathy, right? So we're going to talk about those different groups and we're going to see what we can do about this. First, I would recommend you to watch this TED Talk by Lera Boroditsky. She's a cognitive scientist, and she did studies on exactly this topic. So on how our thinking is shaped by the way we speak and by the language that we grow up with. It's a really amazing talk. She's a scientist. I'm not. So I very much recommend you to watch that talk because she summarizes it in an amazing way. One example, for example, she talks about is that some languages languages have a grammatical gender, right? So German, Spanish, French, we put a gender on our nouns. So for example, in German, the sun is feminine. In Spanish, it's masculine. While for the moon, it's reverse. And what they used that for is they started to study how this actually affects how we think about certain people, certain jobs, certain objects. And what they did find is that there is a difference depending on the language. So one example that they did is they asked native Spanish speakers and native German speakers to describe a bridge, the same bridge. The native German speakers described the bridge to be stunning, beautiful, aesthetic. And the reason why they did that is because in German, the word bridge is feminine. So they attributed more feminine adjectives to it. In Spanish, the bridge is masculine. So the Spanish speakers describe the bridge to be strong, stealthy, long, using words that are considered more masculine for the masculine stereotype. And that is solely because in one language it's feminine and in the other it's masculine. So it's kind of amazing how your perception is changed just by the language that you grow up with. So I really enjoyed that example. And there's a couple of others in that talk, so please go ahead and watch it. It's really interesting. So what does that mean for us in design? We have to pay attention to biased language when we're designing, not just in our own language, but also in general. I'm mostly going to focus on English because that's what I'm doing this in today, but each language has its own challenges. And unfortunately, I don't have enough time to get into all of them. What is biased language? Biased language includes expressions that demean or exclude people because of age, sex, race, ethnicity, whatever else. And what's really tricky about this is that using biased language contains hidden messages about the perceived superiority or inferiority of various groups or types of people. So, for example, if I were to say, oh, she's just a girl, that's biased language because I'm implying that being a girl um, basically means I'm inferior in some way, or she's inferior in a way. Some example of biased language you can see here. These are just a couple, and there's really hundreds of examples out there. It really comes down to phrases, but also words that, for example, already include some sort of gender from an historic standpoint. So if you say confined to a wheelchair, that's biased language because technically a wheelchair enables a person to move. So why are we saying the person is confined to a wheelchair? It's just a phrase that we learned like that and we keep using it even though it's incorrect. It fosters a stereotype where someone with a disability is always at a disadvantage or is confined to a wheelchair. Another big one, of course, is using he as a universal pronoun, using the male as the default. That's a big one. And one that affects multiple areas. For example, what you can see here on the right, cleaning lady and fireman. There are certain occupations that are already associated with a gender from the start, like fireman or cleaning lady, or if I say he visited a doctor, you're going to think of a man most likely. And that is because in our society, a certain picture is associated with each occupation. And for doctor, that's more frequently than not male. So when we write those things into our designs, we have to pay very good attention to what the implications are of what we're saying. And in real life, this is really difficult to do, right? Sometimes you're going to say wrong things, you're going to trip up. For example, one thing I trip up with often is that I say, hey guys, even though I'm not only addressing guys, I'm addressing a group of people with all kinds of genders. And I still say, hey guys, because it's a phrase that we simply learn in English. So I will try to correct myself. I will try to say, hey everyone, or something else. So don't be too hard on yourself. But when we have the chance to design and write the text in our designs, we can pay attention to this because we have a bit more time to think about it. So what are some critical design decisions that we have to make that always come up? A really big one is asking for gender. And this is one that can trip us up a lot. Every one of you has seen this before. You have the gender and then you have male and female. And anytime you see this, I can tell you it's incorrect. This is the only wrong way to do it. I can give you an example from my work. So I had a client where they had an enterprise software that was used by expert users, and it was a couple of thousand users. Actually, it was a lot of users, and they had this in their profile settings. So I asked them, hey, what do you need this for? Do we need to have this? And they were like, yeah, they need this for statistics. They want to keep it in. And so I asked them, and then I kind of explained to them, okay, there's a difference between sex assigned at birth and gender identity. Which one do you want, right? And in general, they wanted to have the gender. And then I provided them with a list of possibilities and how this could be realized. And they were like, whoa, this is way too complex. We don't need this. And then I asked them, how many users do you have? And they were like, oh, well, we have around 7,000 users. And then I asked them, are you sure that all of them are male or female? And that kind of well, let's just say they took it back and they were like, okay, you know what, let's remove the option altogether. Sometimes that's the way to go. So how do we solve this? How do we design this and how do we write about this? Because this is such a complex topic, there is no simple answer. There's never a simple answer to a complex topic. So here are some suggestions what some websites do. What I really like is the one in the middle. This with I am, because this is FocusMate. It's a website where you can sit together with others in remote meetings. And they were the first ones I saw where you could select multiple genders and where you could add your own as well, which is really nice. You have all the flexibility you need, essentially. Of course, there's also LinkedIn, Instagram, and so on, and it's debatable which ones are the best to use. In my opinion, always go with a very flexible solution if you actually have to ask for it, right? That's the first point. If you don't need to ask for it, don't put it in your software if it's not of value to the user. The middle example is from FocusMate. You can look them up. It's a really cool website. Addressing the user. This one is kind of related to gender. It's about pronouns. Sometimes when the client asks for a gender, they actually want to know the pronouns because they want to have, pronouns they can put maybe in their newsletters or in their notifications or whatever else, right? So what you can do here is you can use this instead of the gender. If the gender gets too complicated and it doesn't add value to the user as a means of self-expression, then maybe asking for the pronouns is a better option. For example, I'm currently working on a tool that connects people through an app and a website, and we decided against using gender, but we're going to use pronouns instead, because that is what you can show to the users, to each other, and then they know how to address each other in a chat, for example. Of course, this is also a really difficult topic because in gender and pronouns, the list is always incomplete. There's new pronouns coming up every month or so. There's new genders, new variations, things get removed, things get added. So what can you do? I myself had this problem a couple of months ago where I designed a pronoun screen for an app. And then a couple of weeks later, I realized that the way I designed it didn't work anymore because I discovered that there are neo pronouns. So the way I designed it was a little bit like you see here on the left. Basically, I had all the options, not just she, he, and they, but also some other pronouns that are most commonly used. But I had it in a drop down. The problem was neo pronouns nowadays, people start mixing pronouns. So someone could not only be she, her, they could also be she, they, or she, them, right? Which means it's a combination of she and they. And my solution couldn't show that. You couldn't select that. So I went to the client and I said, hey, I'm sorry, something changed here. Do we want to adjust it? And then you start the discussion again. So as you can see, no easy solution there. And it's very tricky, but also really, really interesting. I also really like the way LinkedIn does it, which is the example on the right, where if you pick custom, you can just type your own. That's probably the simplest solution and usually works really well. Of course, you're always going to have people abusing it, maybe, or making fun of it, but that's just something you have to deal with. Sensitivity and visibility of data in general. So how do you deal with these kind of topics? It's kind of a balancing act between wanting to give the user the means to express themselves and empower themselves through being able to put these things on their profile or share those things, but also not wanting to get too personal. Do you really have to ask for the gender? Do you really have to ask for the sex assigned at birth? And if so, why? Right? Why are you asking for this? Give visibility options to the users so they can decide who sees what. These are sensitive topics. You may trigger someone. You have to be aware of that. So it's always good to give the context and let them know, hey, this is the visibility setting. This and this person can see it, but you can change it at any time. Uh, Give context. Why are you asking for this? And provide all options. So what you can see here on the right is, is a really cool example of not giving all the options. If you design this and you don't give all the options, you failed. This because it's gonna trigger someone. It's not going to serve its purpose of empowering the people because there's not all the options, right? So this is something we have to be very aware of to not accidentally exclude someone. And it's very tricky to do. Giving context, usually you have a tooltip or a link to an article where you're explaining why you're asking for that data, how the visibility setting works, and what you actually mean. So for example, in the bottom here on the left image, you can see that they're actually asking for the sex. So I assume the sex assigned at birth, and they're giving an explanation as to why. And they're giving the option to add gender information, so gender identity as well. I'm not sure why they only have male and female. I would say that for sex assigned at birth, I would offer male, female, and intersex. But let's just ignore that for now. I'm also not sure where the screenshot is from, so I cannot check what they're actually meaning here. So yeah, there's no way of always getting it 100% right, but by trying, we're already improving the current status quo, which used to really just be male female, right? We want to break that apart and we want to reorder it. So because of this whole inclusive design topic, because of it being so complex from the outside, so many people ask like, why do we need this? Why do we have to do this? Why do you want me to have 50 gender options in my website, in my app, right? The client may ask this, the CEO may ask this, other business stakeholders may ask this, and then you should have a really good answer to that. And I'm going to try to give you some options for what this actually means. So first of all, there's a real life impact to exclusion, right? People being excluded in their daily life. And I have a really great example. It's actually from this book. It's Invisible Woman: Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. I do have this in the resources at the end, so no worries. Basically, a study was done observing how deadly and how dangerous car accidents are. Yes, the book is fantastic. um, and what they found is that women are 46% more likely to have severe injuries from a car crash, and 71% more likely to have moderate injuries. They're also 17% more likely to die in car accident. And regardless of the intensity of the car crash, the speed, whatever, like they took all those variables into account. It's not about how women drive versus men. It's actually just the core problem that cars are more dangerous for women. And why is that? Because cars are designed for men. And the reason why cars are designed for men is because test dummies that were introduced in the 1950s actually follow the average male size. They're 1.77 meters tall, they're 70, 60 kilograms heavy, and that is a lot bigger than the average sized woman. So, what happens? Cars are tested with this and equipped with seats with safety measures that fit the average male but don't fit the average female. What happens is that women often tend to sit incorrectly because the car is, for example, the dashboard is too high. They sit further in the front. They don't have the support from the headrest as much as they would need. So when they have an accident, it's effectively more dangerous for them. There was also an effort to introduce a female test dummy, but it's still not a rule. It doesn't have to be used. And even that female test dummy is just a scaled down version of this test dummy, which is not accurate because the female body has different proportions. So even that doesn't really work in terms of making cars safer for women. That's one, I think, really shocking example of how not designing inclusively can actually kill people. It's insane. Another example, and this is a bit more a social example, I would say. In Japan, there are many, many coffee shops where there's some sort of robot serving you. The cool thing about this particular coffee shop is that these robots are maneuvered remotely by people with disabilities, which is really cool because the people with disabilities, they don't have the possibility to be a server or be a barista, but they can remotely navigate a robot and interact with the guests and earn money. And that is enabling, that is including those people into society, which is really cool. However, there's one part about this that I don't like. If I would ask you now, is this a female or is this a male robot? What would you say? What does it look like to you? Because to me, it very much looks like a female. Yes, it's a female. The proportions, the face, everything is designed to be female. It looks like it has a skirt on, exactly. And why is that? I assume that it might have been an intentional or unintentional choice. Let's say it was intentional. A lot of robots are designed to look like females because they are considered less intimidating, more submissive, more caretaker, passive, right? And this is exactly a stereotype that we don't want. We don't want to feed into this. But there were a couple of people signing off on this design to be produced exactly like that. The question is, do we need to put a gender on robots, or is there a way of designing it so that we don't feed into the stereotype of having the woman as the servant, as the caretaker? So that's how I would criticize this design choice. In general, I think it's great for the people with disabilities, but if a child sees this, what image is that going to perpetuate in their head? Because we're adults, we're able to reflect on this and be like, looks like a woman, maybe that's not a good idea. But a child will see this and will also recognize those features and create that stereotype and further feed into that. So maybe that's not that cool. But yeah, very interesting. Okay, and now your stakeholders and your client, they're gonna be like, what do I care about robots looking like women? They're gonna be like, great, but I still don't get why. um, our society is evolving. Our society is changing. Um, I have some numbers here, and this is the best way to have a discussion with stakeholders, usually by showing them some numbers. I also have the resources here. Some of these numbers are kind of rounded up, so please don't take them for 100% accuracy. We have 15% of the world population having some mild to severe disability. We also have in the whole world around 10% of people that are over 65. For those people, we need accessible design. We desperately need it, right? Because these numbers are growing. As you can see, for age over 65, this number is expected to double by 2050. Also, all our abilities are temporary. Thank you for the comment. Yes, when we're designing for accessibility, it doesn't just benefit people with permanent disabilities and abilities, it also benefits people with temporary disabilities. So I read this somewhere about TikTok with their speech to text caption feature that, I don't know, 80% of people using it are not in fact disabled. There are people that use it, for example, to look at TikToks in public where they don't want to have the sound on, or where they're in a very noisy environment and so on. So this is something that totally pays off and that you can always bring as an argument. Another point, ethnic minorities, we have around 30% in the US. Of course, ethnic minority always depends on the area you're in. That's why I picked the number for the US. And I also put a very interesting and very key point here. For Gen Z and millennials, we have around, in the US, around 42% of the population is Gen Z and millennials. And why did I put that number here? Millennials and Gen Z are one of the main consumer groups and will continue to be because as they're getting older and the newer generations are also coming into that. Uh, and they will also be the main workforce. So what they really, really care about is exactly those topics: inclusive design, diversity, and so on. So what you can see here, for example, 75% of Gen Z and millennials will boycott companies that discriminate against race or sexuality. We've all seen people and companies get canceled on social media. Right? Social media is a powerful tool for this. We saw in the Black Lives Matter movement that companies that would not speak out, that would not be supportive of the movement, would be canceled or would be put into a negative light because they simply didn't get up to speed with it. So Gen Z and millennials are actually so far, the most diverse and inclusive generations that we have, and it's only growing. So, for example, the Gen Z generation in US is 60% actually belong to an ethnic minority, and that's a lot. So, when you think about it, 60%, if for Gen Z, then that's not even a minority anymore. That's the majority of them. And it's a very good development for us because these topics are getting more and more important, and more these are our customers, these are our users. We cannot neglect them. We have to emph- empathize, sorry, we have to empathize with them, right? So these are some arguments that you can bring to your stakeholders, maybe, because I can guarantee you, and this is something you can also tell your boss, if you don't invest into an inclusive strategy now, you're going to fall through in a couple of years. Because just like accessibility has been growing and now has fixed standards that can be applied and are regularly used, the same will happen for inclusive design. This will be the default in a couple of years from now. So it's better to start early than to start late. And it's easy, it's better to invest now rather than later on. So I hope that helps you to kind of talk to your colleagues, be annoying to them, inform them about it, show them the numbers, bring this up because there's way too many people that don't care, right? But our job as a designer is to care for the user and to have that empathy, not to pity, but to have that empathy that we need in order to design for them. So, as you can see here, this is how our society looks. We're getting more open, more diverse. And I always hear very strange arguments from people. Like, I don't know, they may say like, oh, 10 years ago we didn't have that many gay people. I'm like, yes, that's not true. It's just that 40 years ago people were put into conversion therapy and killed for being gay, so maybe that's why they didn't speak up, right? But now we have the sounding board with social media and we can express ourselves, so let's use it, and let's turn our software into something that is more inclusive. All right, so I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit, I noticed, but that's fine. Here are some more resources about inclusive design. You can take a screenshot. I'm gonna share it also on my LinkedIn, and they have some really nice guidelines and explain even further how inclusive design can be incorporated into your company. UX writing. Okay, let's talk about UX writing. You can know everything about inclusive design, but you also need to know how to use the words in your designs, and they're more often than not they're neglected. So let's look at how UX writing works. Writing is designing. We want to guide the user through the software so they can achieve their goal. That's pretty much what UX is all about, right? When you look at an interface without all the text, you suddenly realize just how important it is to have those texts in there. Without the text, you cannot really tell what's going on. You have no idea. But as soon as I add them, it takes like 3 seconds and you know what this is about, right? Okay, it's about ordering food. Here are my options. Here I can leave a tip and so on. The language and the words are so important and they're more necessary than ever. So how can we do this? How can we do the UX writing? First, we have to differentiate between two things. And that is UX writing and copywriting. UX writing is guiding the user through the software. Copywriting is to acquire users and build a relationship with them through social media and marketing. So, some UX writing copies would be error messages, labels, everything you find in your software or your service or product. Copywriting, on the other hand, is social media, blog posts, landing pages, and all that. Now, these are not mutually exclusive. They belong together and they're connected through voice and tone. The voice and tone of your product determines how your UX writing looks and how your copywriting looks. This time in this talk, I will focus on the UX writing side. I will not focus so much on the copywriting side. So sorry about that. So let's jump right in. We have to pay attention to the words because language is our main way of communicating, right? The way we communicate is through language and through writing. So if we don't pay attention to that in our designs, we're missing out a lot, and sometimes that will even break our user experience. We also have to take into account what emotions the user's in when they're doing a certain activity. So, for example, when you're writing an error message, you may want to be a bit more precise and to the point, and you don't want to joke around or anything because the user is frustrated. They don't want to hear your jokes when there's an error. They just want to know how to solve it, right? So, depending on the situation, you're going to have to shift your tone. You're going to have to write differently. So, let's look at how this can be done. In the design process, there are some questions you have to ask yourself. And usually, if these are not answered, that's what's missing in your design process, and that's some of the common mistakes that we have. Who is responsible? What does the person who is responsible need in order to provide those words when you have that responsible person? And when do we need it? Super important. When do we need those words? Do we need it before UX? Do we need it before UI or even before development? When do we do the whole writing thing? And who's responsible? The client? Is it us? Who knows? It really depends on how your company works, but you can narrow it down to those 3 points: responsibility, preparation, and timing. And I think we can all relate to this. I know that could relate to this a couple of months ago. A lot of designers don't want to write because they're insecure about it, or they don't really know how they could do it. So I'm going to give you some tips, and hopefully that will help you to be able to write better copy and also put a focus on the words, because sometimes we forget, right? Sometimes we start designing, we put some placeholder, whatever, we show it to the client, they're confused because what we put in there is not the correct content. And we want to avoid that. What is the status quo? This is the status quo. The status quo is lorem ipsum. The status quo is showing designs where we don't know what content we want to have in it, uh, being confused about it, or even breaking the design, or even breaking the design once it gets into development, because suddenly the real content comes in and it breaks everything. And you look at it and you're like, and you have to go back. You have to go back and redesign it. And that costs money. That's literally money down the drain. The worst case is really when this happens, when it's already in development, because there's going to be a bunch of people mad at you. And yeah, it's really a pain. And that's why UX writer has become its own position and its own role, because there's just so much to pay attention to that it's really a separate occupation at this point. So how can we make sure this doesn't happen? First, we need to identify what kind of issue we're facing when we're designing. Um, let's say you have one specific feature you're designing. Ask yourself, am I having, if you already have some screens, am I having a design issue, a writing issue, or both? Sometimes you will be able to fix your design by changing the words, but you're not a magician if you're a UX writer. So sometimes you change the words and it still doesn't work because something that was meant to be a button is a link, or the layout is all wrong. So you have to work closely with designers to figure out what kind of mistake is this, who can fix this, how. So I really love this meme. You have to go follow this meme page on Instagram, by the way. It's amazing. I love it so much. Uh, some examples for what design issues and writing issues could be: maybe for the design issue, the user cannot find a certain element because it's placed somewhere where they don't expect it, or the user doesn't know what to focus on in the interface because there's just too much going on. A writing issue could be that the user misunderstands something because vocabulary is used that the user doesn't understand. Or the user doesn't read the information at all and doesn't know what to do. This usually happens when we have too much text, right? They just skip over it. Goodbye, text. I don't want to read all this. Uh, but this is just some general idea. You're going to have to look at it case by case, of course. Then, 3 main points. Clear, concise, human. That's how we want to write. Those 3 points are super important. First of all, for writing clear copy, the text copies in the software help the user move forward, explain new concepts, and provide instructions quickly by breaking up information into digestible chunks. What does that mean? We use paragraphs, we use line breaks, we make sure that we use a mix of shorter, and longer sentences. Some methods you can use to make your writing more clear is maybe to use an inverted content pyramid, and this is something I stole from copywriting. Basically, you start with the most important information. Who, what, when, where. What information is needed right now? And you answer those questions first. You write the content that is needed to answer those questions right in that moment. Focus on the most important information, as I mentioned already, and ask yourself, is the writing accurate? Is it purposeful? And is it giving enough information? A really great example for for how clear writing should be or should not be, let's say. It's one of these. I love this. That's also from the same meme page, by the way. So, being clear, having clear writing is not just about being precise, it's about also being distinct. Don't use the same words for different actions, like here, like cancel and cancel subscription. Even the user will figure this out, but they will need to take a second glance and a third glance to be sure that they're not accidentally doing something they don't want to do. Right? And this is cognitive load that we want to save the user from. We don't want them to have this kind of issue. So clarity is important. Clarity above all. That should be your first priority. Next one, concise. We want to convey information in a short and to the point way. Only provide information that is necessary right in that moment. And this is difficult because sometimes we overdo it. And if there's a multiple step thing going on, we put information in one and then the other and then the same thing again. You don't need it. The user will remember and keep things in context. So some methods you can use, and this is from the book Microcopy, the complete guide. Amazing book. This is like the holy grail of UX writing and microcopying. You should look at it. You want to motivate the user before an action. You want to guide them during the action, and you want to give them feedback after. The same goes for error messages. For error messages, you want to inform the user what happened. You want to inform the user what they can do to fix it. And if they cannot fix it, give them an alternative for what they can do. For writing concisely, it's important to note that short is not always better, but in general, try to keep it short because users scan the text. They are not there to read, they're there to do something. They don't want to read a wall of text. Keeping it simple with the language really helps with that, because if you have a bunch of complicated words, native speakers and non-natives alike will have issues. So you can prioritize the information you want to show and then really see what you can omit. What can I remove from this and it's still being all right. Thank you for the time check. I think we're perfectly on time. We have one exercise that we're going to do together, and afterwards we already have the Q&A. So I think we should be done by, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes. I think that's perfect. So we want to keep it concise, keep it short, and only the information that is necessary. Human. This is a really important one. We want to introduce simple and clear language without sounding like a robot. And we have to consider the context, emotions, and motivations of the user. This is where the empathy comes in. This is where the inclusive design comes in very strongly as well. Some methods that you can do here, and I love these are a lot of fun. If you have a certain flow that you need to depict, something that may end up as a form or something where you have to ask for a lot of information from the user, try a talking aloud or conversation method. Turn it into a chat as if the software was talking to the user, and see what the natural flow of the conversation is And then you can use that for designing your software, for designing the forms. Be like, okay, first I would ask for the name, then I would ask for the age, then they would respond like this and that, and so on. I promise you, this will make your designs more conversational and a lot more logical for the user as well. Additionally, what you can use here is the branding voice and tone if you have it, because you may want to talk to them maybe in a casual way, maybe in a business way, maybe you want to be funny, maybe you want to be smart or something like that. And you can only do that if you have that branding material. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to actually get into that. But if you have it, for example, Slack has a very specific voice and tone. MailChimp has a very specific one. You can look at their voice and tone guidelines. It's super interesting. And yeah, clear, concise, human. That's what we want. Let's do an exercise together. Okay. Now I'm gonna wake you up from your sleep, and we're gonna do an exercise together. Mm, Here we have an example from Google Calendar. What happens here? When you edit a calendar entry that you did not create yourself, when you save it, this is the dialog you get. And what you can see immediately is there's a lot of text. Like, I don't even want to read all that. So let's check if we have, all of those three attributes in place. Is it clear? Well, not really. It's not very precise. If you would just cover the description text of the dialogue, and only what's left is "Are you sure?" and "Okay." If you would only have that, you would have no idea what it's about. So it's not really very clear, is it? Is it concise? No, it's not. It's really not. What especially trips me up is this whole last part where it says it is recommended that you keep a copy of your changed event description elsewhere. This is a suggestion, and it's great to have, sure, but it's not necessary at all. It's not concise, it's a huge chunk of text, and it's not broken up in any way. So whenever you stumble upon this dialogue, you're again gonna have to read it to recognize that it's that one dialogue. You know what I mean? So it's not very concise. Is it human? Well, maybe. Let's try to use our conversation method for that. Let's see if I can. Yeah, here it is. So I just took the title and the buttons of this dialogue and turned it into a meme. And what you can see here is that it's not very conversational. It's not very human, because I would ask you, "Are you sure?" and you would just say, "Okay." That's not a response to "Are you sure?" If you have dialogues, make sure that the headline is a question, and that the buttons correspond to that with an action. Okay, make it conversational. Make it make sense if you say it aloud, because this does not make sense. So now is the time where we're actually going to do some UX writing. Rüya, maybe you can send the link for the Miro board again. We're going to switch to a Miro board, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do. We're actually going to improve the writing of this very dialogue. So I'm going to switch over here. And you can just join the bot. Woo! Yeah, I already see so many people. Awesome. Great. I wasn't able to lock some of these layers, so please don't click around too much just yet. Here I have a UX writing cheat sheet for you here that you can take a look. It kind of summarizes everything that we talked about. You can take a screenshot if you like, and this may help you in the UX writing exercise. So let's look at the exercise. Wait, I'm just gonna bring everyone to me. Bring everyone to me. Yes. Did that work? I'm not sure. Okay. You can also see it in my shared screen. So you are in Google Calendar. You decide you want to edit the description of a calendar invite you did not create yourself, and you edit the description and press save. This pop-up appears. The task now for you is to rewrite the copies in this dialogue to be clear, concise, and human. We have 10 minutes for this. Wait, how late is it now? Yeah, I think 10 minutes is fine. If we need a little more, that's totally okay. So if you move to the right, you see I made all of these copies, and on the right I always made a copy where I put a white box over it and some new text fields, so you can click into the text fields and you can start writing your own copy. Okay. I think we can go ahead and start doing that now. Just pick a space for you, and I will look at the time, and you can go ahead and start writing and enjoy the ride. Just have fun with it, okay? And keep the principles we talked about in mind. Awesome. Already so many people. I'm gonna mute myself for now so you can. Oh Jesus, do we have enough of these? I think we might. I'm gonna mute myself for now and leave you to it. And in 10 minutes we will go back and I will look at some of your writing. If you have any questions, just write it in the chat. All right. I'm just gonna turn off my camera because I feel like my laptop cannot handle the mirror board and the video. But once I'm done with the mirror board, I will turn my video back on. So my apologies on that. I know that some people are still writing. You can stay on the board after the workshop as well and finish your writing, and you can send it to me on LinkedIn if you would like me to evaluate it or look at it. But since we do have a bit of a time constraint, I think I'm just gonna go and look at one or two of them. So let's see who's finished. Let's check. Let's check. You're always crazy sometimes. Mm, maybe the first one. I'm just gonna look at the first one. Don't worry about it maybe not being finished. That's fine. That's part of the process. So let's look at what was written here. So the title is Your Changes Will Only Affect Your Own Calendar. I like that because you're being very precise in the title already, which is a lot better than what's in the original dialogue. I'm just going to put the cursors away for a second. This means if the organizer changes the original event, your changes will be undone. You best keep a copy of your changed event somewhere as a reference. Great, very to the point. I do think that, you know, whatever the person wants to do with their copy is basically up to them. So in my opinion, it's not something you really have to state in the dialogue. But since you've shortened the first part of the dialogue so much, it's still not a lot of text. I also like that you have this line break in there. So it's a lot nicer to read and it's not just this long text. And then in the buttons, you have I see, never mind, changing, and okay, I understand. I do think that these buttons could be maybe shortened a little bit. For example, the I see, never mind, changing could just be never mind, or discard changes would maybe be a bit more accurate. And the okay, I understand could also be maybe a bit more precise and could be like something save changes or something like that. What I do like is that you were using the same terminologies everywhere. You're using the changes, and here again, changed event, and so on. So you were using the same word in the same context the whole time. So very well done, and very good. Let's look at another one. This one has an emoji next to it, so I'm gonna pick this one. Um, Change only in your calendar, question mark. I like that. It's phrased like a question. Change anyway, create a copy. Okay, you're providing an actual additional option, which I also very much like. The changes you make will only apply to your own calendar and will get lost if the organizer changes the event. We recommend to create a copy. Very nice. I really, really, really like this dialogue text. It's a lot shorter. It has the right amount of information in it, and I think it's great. Very well done. I also like that you phrased the dialogue title as a question. That's something very nice to do for confirmation dialogues. Cool. Very great. Awesome. People, please do send me your text that you write, and I can look at it in LinkedIn. I'm sorry that I cannot look at all of them. That's a shame. But I think you all understood what the basics of UX writing are about, and I'm very excited because this is really going to upgrade your designs if you start paying a bit more attention to that. We're oh, I forgot. I also made a version of this dialogue, of course. So this would be my solution. Save changes to your calendar, question mark, as buttons with cancel and save. So I'm reusing the same word from the title, right? The save changes and the button is save. So that makes it a bit easier. Also, I reduced the text and broke it out into two sentences. So the changes you made will only be visible in your own calendar entry. If the organizer edits the event, your changes may get overwritten. I did not give any recommendation for what to do with that because I think it's up to the user, right? Make a copy or not. Are you fine with this? Is this a personal note? Whatever they want to do with it. But it's already a lot better than the original one. Either way, thank you for your participation. That was awesome. I'm going to take some time afterwards to look at all your other writings and maybe I can make some notes or we're going to do it for LinkedIn. We'll see about that. But very cool. Thank you for your participation. So as a final as a final part to this presentation, let's talk about how we can establish reusable UX writing practices. We talked about the common mistakes in UX writing and inclusive design in the design process. So, what can we do to improve this in our own company? What if you're the only one caring about the words, right? Usually, the UX writers, there's always only one in a company that starts the whole conversation, right? First, please ditch lorem ipsum. Please, please, please ditch lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is not a good placeholder text. What if you have lorem ipsum everywhere in your wireframes and designs? That means you do not have enough information to even design the screen, because the content determines the layout in many cases, not always, but very frequently. So what you can see here is an example I did, where I put lorem ipsum into the text, and then I imagined that we would get some real text later on. And what you realize then is, okay, there's a lot less text in there. We actually only have two onboarding options, not just one. So it affects the whole design, really. And this is on the right, this mockup is a way better discussion base with a client than a screen that only has lorem ipsum in it. Okay, only use lorem ipsum if there's really no, like, as a last resort. But ideally you should have a conversation with the client or with internally to figure out, hey, what kind of copy will go here. Even if you write something blah blah yourself, it could be that the client says, yeah, this is exactly what we want to have in there, let's keep it. No, there's really no loss about when you do something like this, when you spend 5 minutes writing the copy yourself. So please ditch lorem ipsum. That's the first one. Focus on the words from the start. This is an image from the Writing is Designing book. It's in the resources later on. It's great. Um, when you start doing UX writing, you will start to shift your perspective a bit more towards content. What that means is that when you're in a first call with a client, you will start paying attention to the words they're using. What's the vocabulary they're using? You maybe start writing down some terms. You see that they're using different terms for the same thing. So certain users use one word, certain users use another. You start to write things down and see, okay, what do we need? Also, from an information architecture point, this is really important. So if you do a research or user interview, you could ask the user, what is something visual you created, for example? Instead of saying, hey, what's a chart you made? Because maybe they don't call it a chart, maybe they call it something else. And you want to use the words that the users are using as much as possible. So focus on the words. Try content first design. This is very nicely explained in the book, Nicely Said. Wait, let me just. Baby Yoda, stop. He's gatekeeping my books. Nicely Said. This is mostly about copywriting, this book, but it has the content first approach in it, explained very nicely. And that is to, as a first step, before you even start doing the wireframes, figure out the information architecture and figure out what content will be on what page. Very useful for content heavy products. I do recommend. This really helps you to figure out what you have to write, and then you can add it as soon as you start doing the UX.